us now, former NFL executive, the best man at Brian's wedding. You'll hear him on the GM Shuffle podcast. It's the great Michael Lombardi here with you on The Fan. And a good afternoon, sir. How the heck are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you guys? You recovered? Everything good? That storm was a bad one last week.
Yeah, we've had some storms.
Fun one, man.
We've had some disappointing Cowboys football. A big question here this week, sir, is, Niners, one of your former teams, kind of vulnerable. Are they down enough the Cowboys could actually beat them?
Oh, I think it'll be a close game, yeah. I mean, look, the Niners have really struggled. They went from being one of the most explosive offenses when they were in base personnel with McCaffrey, Ayuk, Kittle, Debo, and then you sprinkle in, Jennings and whomever else they want to put on the field. They were fast, and now they're slow as can be. They have no explosiveness. And if they can't get the run game going, which they should be able to against Dallas, it makes it really hard. I thought Purdy played one of his worst games going back to when he played against Baltimore at home on, I think it was Thanksgiving night. That was the time he played poorly. This is a team that is typical of teams that go to the Super Bowl and lose. They have a lot of injuries. They don't have the same drive, the same motivation that they had. I think they're tired. And I think yesterday they really were never in that game. It might have been 14-12, but the Kansas City Chiefs defense was just way too superior to the 49er offense. So, look, this is against two teams that used to be really good but aren't as good anymore.
What are some of the issues you've been seeing with the Cowboys? A lot was made with Troy Aikman's comments about the route running at receiver. Mike McCarthy said, I don't really agree with the choice of words there from Troy. But what are some of the things out of the bye week? I mean, can you even do much in the bye week to correct all their problems?
Well, you should be able to do a lot. You got to self-scout the hell out of it, right? You got to sit down in a room and say, why are we 31st in red zone offense? Why are we 31st in red zone defense? I mean, that's the number one thing they got to do. Forget about the route running. They got to figure out how to get the ball in the end zone and keep the other team from getting it in the end zone. That's the way you win games. Look, everybody's got an opinion on what's wrong with the Cowboys. I said it last offseason. Everybody laughed at me. I don't think they're as talented as the media has made them out to be. They've got some really talented players, but they've got some huge concerns in both lines, especially a defensive tackle. They're not very big at linebacker. People can run the football. Look, Mike Zimmer didn't become a bad coach overnight, right? They can coach. They know what they're doing. They just can't seem to get it with the personnel. Three things happen to a football team. And, I've said this and I wrote about it in Gridiron Genius. Football teams are like going to the veterinarian. They don't talk to you. You have to have systems in place to diagnose what's wrong, just like a vet does. You bring your dog to the vet, the dog doesn't tell the vet what ails him. The vet figures it out. It's the same thing with football teams. It's either players, coaches, or schemes, right? And I really think as much heat as Mike McCarthy gets, his schemes are good, right? And I think he coaches well offensively. But I just don't know if they have enough, and especially when they have a clutch. They don't have a running game, which kills them. Look, Goff threw the ball 25 times. Goff's on this incredible 3-game streak where he's not throwing any completions. He hasn't thrown the ball more than 25 times in a game because they can balance it. Look, I know this. You can't run the football and score points. I get that, right? Mm-hmm. But what the running game does for you is control the game. You get control of the football game when you can run it. And then it allows you to make big plays down the field in terms of play action pass. The Cowboys have no run game. They never are going to be in control of the game, ever. And because they can't run the ball effectively, they don't have as much explosiveness down the field. Those are two things that go hand in hand. So, look, I think that's the problem offensively. And then defensively, I think it's really a talent issue. They have no tackles. Their corner situation isn't as good as it's been. And when they can't play from in front, right?
Right.
Okay, so last year they led the National Football League in 124-point differential at halftime. Most important stat in all of football, first half-point differential. They were number one in that category. This year they're behind in a half. So teams can keep running the ball. Last year they ran the ball on the Cowboys, just nobody paid attention to it. In the 5 losses, they gave up massive amount of run yards in those games because they weren't playing from ahead.
If you're in that front office right now, do you have any regret with the Dak and CeeDee Lamb contracts, or is this sort of a blip on the radar?
I think it's a blip on the radar. Look, I mean, Dak, you paid him, you had to pay him. I mean, where are they going to go? It's easy to say don't pay Dak, but then you want to live without Dak. We've all gone through that. You get fired when you do that. So I think, to me, they got to build the right team around Dak. I think the biggest issue is they got to have a legitimate good run game. I think what I don't want Dak, I think Dak's a really good player. I don't want Dak throwing it 40 times a game. I just don't. I think there's got to take some pressure off of them. But you got to be in control of the game to do that. And look, they've got good players. Look at Detroit. I mean, Detroit's sitting up there. I'm going to say Brown's a good player. Jared Goff Jared Goff was never thought he's better than Dak, but he's playing really well. They have balance to what they do because they have a really good center, and they have two really good tackles and everything else in between. I mean, they were playing backup guards last day and still were able to run the ball against Minnesota, who's hard to run the ball on. So I think to me, that's the bigger issue is, look, when people say we need to run the ball, it's so boring and it's so outdated. But what it brings to you is the ability to control the game. And that's something the Cowboys can't do.
Michael, okay, you can't control the game. Is it more you talked about Mike McCarthy, and you're okay with the scheme. Are you struggling with the offensive line, or are you struggling with the backs?
I'm struggling with the offensive line. I just think, to me, that was the weakness of the team last year, Brian. I think when you watch the Philly game, right? All right, they got Philly, they got the ball first and goal at the 5. What happens? Steele doesn't block Riddick. Next thing you know, we can't win that game.
Yeah.
I think every time they got to play a good team, they struggled to protect. I think the line, now look, they drafted some good young players in Guyton and Beebe, and they're going to be good, but it's going to take some time, right? It's just going to take some time. They've got to get more physical. They've got to be able to control the line. I think the back needs to help them as well. I think Zeke's a short yardage back. I mean, I think Jerry sees Zeke something different than I see Zeke. I think Zeke would be a good finisher on the goal line. Dowdle is a good player. Is he elite? I don't think so. Look, I think there's a combination of things, but they've got to be able to be more physical up front. There's no question about that.
Michael Lombardi here with you in the GBag Nation, home of the Cowboys. So this year, it's kind of a lost cause probably, unless you get some sort of a miracle. But when you talk about the talent, like how bad off are these Cowboys in the medium to long term as far as this standard they've created for the last 10 years? It feels like they're losing touch with it.
Yeah, well, I do think they have. I mean, I think Will McClay does a good job. They find players, right? And they're going to have to, but they're picking down there in the bottom of the first round. They take Maisie Smith, and then somewhere in the 20s. You're not going to hit on all those picks. I mean, and I think the draft is going to get weaker and weaker as we move along because of NIL. I think these kids are going to stay in school, so the back end finding guys in the 4th and 5th round are going to be a lot harder because they're going to be seniors in the 4th and 5th round. They're not going to be juniors or redshirt sophomores that come out because they're getting paid too much money to be a 5th round pick to stay in school. So there's no sense in leaving. I mean, would you leave the frat house and having all the free time to come make it your job? Of course not. I mean, why not stay at one of those campuses and have as much fun as you could have? So I think the draft's going to get watered down. You're going to have to be really good at finding players in between the margins, right? And I think that's what they didn't do this offseason, whereas Washington didn't sign any marquee free agents, but they took a lot of the players that really helped Dallas last year. They're not elite players. I'm not sitting here saying they signed, but they signed some really good players that helped their team. And I think that's ultimately what could do. I mean, Frankie Louvu, whether it's Jeremy Chin. I mean, they took Armstrong. They took a lot of guys. They took Fowler. They took guys that can help them. Not that they're elite, don't get me wrong, but they certainly can help them, and it gives them depth, which you need.
Michael, I'd love to pick your brain kind of on the team building philosophy, because that's, I think, a big issue that we've had with Jerry and the Cowboys. They're very draft and develop, which is awesome. But from what you just pointed out with what Washington just did, not so much active in when it comes to free agency, and then the trades are kind of few and far between here. When it comes to the excuse of, okay, we've paid the quarterback, we've paid CeeDee Lamb, all the cap limitations, how real is that when it comes to constructing the front office, and what do you think about the way the Cowboys do it?
Well, look, you made choices, right? I mean, you decided to pay CeeDee Lamb. That's a great choice. You decided to keep Brandon Cooks at his number. You could have probably swapped out Cooks for Derrick Henry. You made a choice, and that's a choice you make. Right, that's kind of the way you construct your team. That's kind of what everything is in terms of personnel. So for me, I think you've got to be able to find guys that can come in and be really good players that nobody else had, and I think they've done that before. Right? They found guys that could come in and help them down. Look. I mean, Detroit gets Tim Patrick on their team, who was basically cut by Denver. He comes in, he's averaging 16 yards a catch. He's helping them. We did it all the time in New England. There's two programs you have to run, right? You got to have a program where you're drafting and developing, and you're developing young players. But then you have to have what I call the junior college program, where you got guys that can come in and play. We learned this from Joe Gibbs. This probably Belichick learned more from watching Joe Gibbs than he did anybody. Joe Gibbs would never, ever play a young player. He had this kid, Ray Brown, from Arkansas Pine Bluff, who was a tight end in college, right? Ray Brown was really talented, but they moved him into offensive line. They redshirted that guy for 2 years. They signed veterans off the street. They let the veterans kind of get him through. And then when Ray Brown was ready to play, they had a really good player. And so that's how you develop players. You understand where your team is. You find veterans to bridge that gap for just a little bit. And then you develop the young players. If you ask the young guys to play right away, they're just not ready to play.
Michael, if this job becomes open for the Cowboys, is it an inviting job for somebody to take?
Well, I mean, look, they have a quarterback. That's one of the main things that makes a job attractive. Do you have a quarterback, right?
Right.
I mean, do you have a quarterback that you think you can win with? And they've obviously won. Now, they haven't won any playoff games with them, but you can win a game with them. They have won a playoff game, but you know what I'm saying. They haven't won a big one. So for me, I think that makes it attractive. You got incredible facilities. You're in a state that has tax-free. You're not paying any taxes on it. You could go down and help solve the JFK murder if you come into town there. That makes it attractive as well. So, yeah, I think it's a hell of a job.
All right, let me ask you this then. Does your friend would he accept this job? Would Coach Belichick look at this job?
I can't speak for him, Brian. I think a lot of it would have to come between conversations between Jerry and him. I mean, I think Bill's one of the great listeners of all time. And I think, to me, he's never been a dictator. I've said this to you off air. I mean, he's never been, this is my way or no way. He's a great listener. Now, you got to bring some juice to you. You can't throw change-ups at him because he'll hit him out of the park.
Right.
You better bring some heat, and you better bring some understanding of what's going on in pro football if you're going to try to get him to convince him to do something. So, look, I can't speak for him. I know that he's working his tail off in in studying the league. He's doing all these media gigs. I work with him every Monday and Tuesday up at NFL Films, and he's on top of the game. He's on top of the players. And I think, to me, what happened in New England is it wasn't really fair. A guy wins 6 Super Bowls. He gets kicked to the curb for Gerard Mayo, who really has never coached. But that's the owner's prerogative. That's what they can do now.
Yeah, and a final question on that, because you have relationships with Bill and with Bill Parcells. Could it be better than what they had with Bill Parcells here?
Well, I think, look, Bill has great respect for Steve, and I do know that, and he has great respect for Jerry. And Bill's a very not saying Parcells isn't, but I think, to me, again, it comes down to listening and understanding. I think Bill always wants to have certain people around him that know who he is. One thing about my relationship with Belichick, if I said, Bill, this guy fits the program, that's all I would need to say. There's no more conversation, right? Because we both know what the program represents. I think that's the hard challenge, is to get people to understand what he's looking for.
Michael, we're almost at the 1-year anniversary of the Texas Rangers World Championship Parade, where our guy, Brian Broaddus, had himself a day. We saw him go buck wild for the first time ever from our perspective. It was boozing, it was dancing, it was having a great time.
Red beans and rice, I hope.
It was Mardi Gras Brian on full display.
Well, he hit the Chinese buffet afterwards. So I don't think there was red beans and rice that day. But I don't know what is that the Broaddus that you grew in love when you guys were hanging out together?
I've never even seen that one, but I would love to. But look, one thing about Brian, when you have a friend like Brian, you got a great friend. So whatever Brian it is, whether it's Mardi Gras Brian, whether it's LSU Brian, whether it's Red Rice and Beans Brian, you got a hell of a guy.
Amen. All right.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, he wasn't going crazy at the wedding day?
The shimmies?
No, he was pretty good. I mean, we were all going crazy, but he was pretty much under control. Damn he was doing good, which is, kind of surprising, but it was fun. We all had a blast. I still remember it. It was a hell of a day.
His rebellious side's starting to really come out these days, Michael. So hopefully we'll keep him contained.
Hey, we get old, man. It's tough now when you get older. I mean, even Springsteen said that the other day, last night on TV. He said, shoot, I used to be able to sleep till 2 o'clock. Now I can't sleep past 8:30. It's called getting old, man.
Michael Lombardi, GM Shuffle Podcast. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, guys.